Namaste, everybody. I offer my pranams to revered Mataji and my pranams to revered Swami Atmarupanandaji. And it's wonderful to be back here once again with all of you. The subject that I have taken up, beyond action and inaction, is basically the Jnana Yoga view of karma from the highest perspective of Advaita Vedanta. And the way I'll approach it is through a particular verse in the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And Swamiji, like yesterday, Swami Atmarupanandaji has made my job easier because he has referred to that verse in the talk, the 18th verse of the fourth chapter. And when I go into that, we will see how do we understand karma from an ultimate perspective in Advaita Vedanta, and then we'll see some practical aspects of it, and then we'll take questions. Okay, I'll just keep track of the time. The verse we are talking about, of course, is a very well-known verse. It's the one which talks about action and inaction, and in a very paradoxical way. The verse goes, Karmanya karmaya pashed akarmani karmachaya Sabuddhiman manusheshu sayukta kritsna karma krit. One who sees inaction in action and action in inaction. So that which is that which is work, you see it as no work at all. And what seems to be no work, you see it as work. That person is enlightened. That person is a wise one, Sabuddhiman, among all human beings. That person is centered in Brahman, Sayukta. And that person is the doer of all work, of all action, performer of all action. So very interesting language there, paradoxical language, obviously. The moment we hear this, it sounds cool. It sounds very Zen. But when you sit to think about it, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, who is wise? Obviously, the person who's wise is the one who sees things as they are. So when somebody's doing work, you say there's work going on. When somebody isn't doing any work, you say there's no work going on. And that's wisdom. And that's common sense. That's wisdom. Why would it be wise to say something just contrary to what appears to be obvious? When somebody is working, why would you say that there's no work being done? Or when somebody is not working, obviously, why would you say that is work? How is that wisdom? So there is a interesting story about this, a funny story about why such language is used. The real reason, of course, we know is that the ultimate reality is beyond language. And one of the strategies to point out something beyond language, when you're forced to speak, when you're forced to use language to convey something about that ultimate reality, which language cannot convey, one of the strategies is to use paradoxical language, to speak in apparent contradictions. And if you're able to resolve that contradiction, you understand what is meant there. What cannot be said outright is implied through a paradox. But anyway, first, the funny story. It's a cute story about why such language is used. You know, the Gita is part of the Mahabharata, this vast epic poem. And the story goes, the sage Vyasa, when he composed this, he wanted somebody to, take it down, a stenographer. That was long before text to speech to text, and Google taking down your speech. You needed a stenographer at that time. And who is capable of doing this? None other than Ganesha. So Ganesha is the person who's going to take down the notes, take down the dictation, and the great sage Vyasa is going to dictate. And Ganesha sets a condition. He says that I will write it down, whatever you say, but the condition is you can't stop speaking. If you stop speaking, if you pause, then I'll put down my pen too, and I will not take it up again. So that'll be the end of your grand book project. Now, Vyasa, to protect himself, because it's difficult. You have to compose Sanskrit shlokas and thousands and tens of thousands of them. You have to take a breather somewhere and come up with inspiration. So to protect himself, he says, all right, I agree, but I have a condition too. My condition is you won't write down anything that you don't understand. So I'm going to tell you all these Sanskrit verses. It's all Sanskrit poetry, and it's difficult. And you won't write it down until you understand it. Uh, I have just reminded, last couple of years back, I was doing this course at Harvard University, and they give lots of assignments. It's difficult at my age to go back to school and do assignments, and that too at Harvard University. So, and I found it's a common problem. All the other graduate students would grumble about it. So in one professor's class, Professor Garfield, he's a noted authority on Tibetan Buddhism. So he gave this big assignment, 25 pages. And immediately there was grumbling and howls of protest from the grad students. And he said, all right, I'm willing to cut it down to 12 pages, but then they all have to be in verse, in poetry. So you have to write an assignment in verses, in English verses, but still in verse. And then we all agreed that, no, that's too much. So we are okay with 25 pages of prose, but no verses, no poetry. So Ganesha says, all right, I agree. I will write it down only after I understand it. So what Vyasa does is, as he's going on his flow of inspiration, and he's getting out of breath and getting out of verses, he gives a particularly difficult verse, which Ganesha has to pause for just a split second to understand what was said. And in that moment, poor Vyasa, he can draw a breath and think of more verses and then go ahead. So these verses, you come across them once in a while in the Mahabharata, especially in the Bhagavad Gita also. These are the ones in which apparently Vyasa took a breath, Ganesha paused for a moment and thought, what does this mean? So this is one of those verses where the secret of action and inaction, and actually it is not about action, it's not about inaction. What is it about? This is about, as Swamiji quoted a little ago in his talk, he quoted Vivekananda saying that don't seek God, just see him. And this verse is one of those powerful verses which enables us not to just seek God, but to see him directly, to experience God. So it's a direct pointer to the nature of reality, of our reality, of God's reality, of the reality of this universe. So it points to the heart of reality, this verse. So it's very important. Now let's go into this. The one who sees, there's action going on, but that wise one, he sees there is no action. And where there is obviously no action going on, no work is going on, the wise one, the enlightened one sees that that is work. So let's take the second one first, where there is apparently no activity. Somebody has decided, I don't want to do karma. Karma leads to bondage. Karma is for ignorant people. Karma is for people with worldly desires. I'm going to give up all karma. I'm going to sit in a mountain cave and meditate or something like that, or go to an ashram and not be involved in things in the world. How is that not action? That's obviously not action. But how is that the enlightened one sees that as action? So this is from the perspective of the ignorant person. The ignorant person says that I will not do anything, and that is giving up karma. But it is not. The enlightened person sees that karma is whenever there is any sense of doership, of controllership, the ego is involved, that I am doing something, or I am not doing anything. I'm doing karma, or I'm giving up karma. The children are grown up and I've had enough of family life. I'm going to sit in an ashram. I'm going away from karma. And I think I am doing a great thing. The Jnani says, you're still in the same samsara. You're still doing it's another kind of karma. How is that so? A good example is nowadays people are fond of fasting, but not for religious reasons, not for religious vows, but for losing weight, for health, which are all good reasons. And there is something in vogue now. They call it intermittent fasting. So many people, I can see people nodding. All right, so it's in vogue. So this person came and said that he's doing intermittent fasting, look at the curious language. I am doing intermittent fasting. But what is fasting? Fasting is not eating. Eating is a kind of action. And not eating is refraining from eating, not eating. And yet he's saying, I am doing intermittent fasting, which points to the fact that it's also a kind of action. As Swamiji pointed out again in his talk, that somebody decides to sit on the couch and says, I won't do anything. But that's a kind of doing. You are using the body, the senses, and using your mind to withhold these from particular kinds of action. That's a kind of action. Sitting and meditating is a kind of action. Repeating a mantra is a kind of action. Controlling the modifications of the mind so that they come into deep meditation, even into samadhi, that's also action. So even at the subtlest level, action is going on. Action and inaction, karma and akarma, are actually pretty similar from the point of view of the ego, from the point of view of the unenlightened person. See, from the point of view of ahankara, the ego, and this will be familiar to all of us. What are the similarities of action and inaction? I'm going to answer this question. Remember, we are still dealing with why is it that the wise person says, when apparently there is no action, the wise person says there is action. When apparently we are saying we have refrained from all activities, the wise one will say, enlightened one will say, you're still in the midst of activities. Why? Because at the unenlightened stage, at our ordinary level of existence, action and inaction are very similar actually. How are they similar? From the perspective of the ego, from my perspective, from your perspective. How is action and inaction, work and not work, karma and akarma, how are they similar? One is, they are both accomplished by the body, senses, and mind. Notice, eating with the body and the senses, and the mind also is involved. Not eating, the body and the senses and the mind are also involved. You're just controlling them, restraining them. So the instruments of action, body, senses, and mind, in Sanskrit, they are called karana. They are all involved in both action and the so-called refraining from action. Second, because you see, there are varieties of goals to be attained. There are varieties of actions and varieties of refraining from actions. We know that actions are of many types. That is very well known. In the same way, inaction is also of many types, in the sense that I may refrain from eating, but when I'm doing pranayama with breathing and holding my breath at some time, I might say, I am not breathing, but that's also a kind of action when I'm actually putting forth quite a bit of careful effort. I am calming my mind and not thinking. A lot of effort goes into it, more effort than actually thinking randomly all the time. So various kinds of actions are there, various kinds of inaction, so-called inaction is also there. From the perspective of the ego, they are not very different. Then another similarity is that they both lead to what is called papa and punya. We can accomplish a lot of merit through our actions. And we can also accomplish a lot of merit through withdrawing from action. So people do religious fasting, for example. Muslims do fasting, intermittent fasting, but through the month of Ramzan, for example. That's a religious activity, and that leads to merit. Similarly, engaging in wrong action, adharmic action, leads to demerit, to sin. And not doing what is right, what was expected of us, that also can produce demerit. So merits and demerits, in Sanskrit, papa and punya, are produced by both action and inaction. From that respect, they're also similar. And then another similarity is, of course, that from the Vedic perspective, or any religion, for example, but from the Vedic perspective also, actions and inactions are both prescribed and prohibited. So there are things the Vedas talk about, do this, Religions give us a list of do's. Please do these things. And you're a devout person, a religious person. Equally, religions and the Vedas, of course, they also give us a list of don'ts. Don't eat this, don't do that, don't do this other thing. So they are the actions and inactions are equally injunction and prohibition, technically. They are in Sanskrit vidhi nisheda. They are both equally the subject of the Vedas, or in general the scriptures of humanity. So from this perspective, action and inaction are basically the same thing, and it's no big, and they say no biggie to see that what seems to be inaction is also a kind of effort, a subtle kind of effort being put in there. What about the other one, the seeing that when there's a lot of activities going on and yet there is no activity? Karmanya karmaya pashyet. The enlightened one sees all the activities being performed by the enlightened one as no activity. So look at the two parts of the verse, the first line. One is, a lot of activity is going on. Enlightened one says, no, there is no activity. And the other one is, apparently no activity is going on. And the enlightened one says, there is activity. So the first one pertains to the enlightened one. Enlightened one sees his or her own activities as no activity, no action actually, ultimate, from an ultimate perspective. And the second part pertains to the unenlightened one. The unenlightened one who has claimed that I have withdrawn from activity. Enlightened one says that that is also a kind of activity. That still, you're still in karma. So the two parts of the first line, seeing no activity where apparently there is a lot of activity, and seeing activity where apparently there is no activity. One pertains to the enlightened one, the other pertains to the ignorant one. And both are the views from the enlightened perspective. Now we are going back to the first part, which is the important thing here. The enlightened one sees no activity, even when that enlightened one is doing a lot of activity. What does that mean? Well, let's go back to what we saw yesterday. All of life is experience, and experience is nothing but objects appearing to consciousness, in consciousness, nothing apart from consciousness. And we are consciousness. And then all of these steps can be contested, and it's good to raise questions about this and reason it out. But we are consciousness. And this consciousness is eternal, unchanging. The objects keep changing. Then this consciousness is the one reality. The objects are appearances in this consciousness. This consciousness is not an object. It is not something that is experienced as an object. Then this consciousness, that which we are, is one, non-dual. Everything that you know and all that you do not know, underlying all of that is this one consciousness. This is Brahman, this is Atman, the absolute reality. And from that perspective, we are neither doers nor the enjoyers, karta, bhokta, no. That one does not do anything, nor does it enjoy or suffer anything. But it makes possible all of this life. You see, we are consciousness, and consciousness is the unchanging reality, but the entire changing panorama is made possible by this consciousness, just as all movies are made possible by the non-changing screen. This consciousness is, not an object. This consciousness is real, and the entire universe is false, an appearance. But this appearance is made possible by the real consciousness. Without it, this appearance wouldn't exist. Then this consciousness is not an object, but the experience of all objects is made possible by this consciousness, which is not an object. And then this consciousness is one without a second, but all by diversity, plurality, multiplicity, all this entire universe of difference is made possible by this one, which is not different in itself, has no diversity within it. And finally, it's not a doer, not an experiencer, but this consciousness makes possible the existence of, or the appearance of, the doer and the experiencer. And I will not explain, but we have done some of this yesterday. It could be an assignment. You could work it out, how this is possible, all of this. Again, use the dream example, use the movie example, perfectly good example, still work. Now bring this to the level of work, action, seeing all activity as no activity at all. It's pretty easy to understand. Shankaracharya gives two beautiful examples. One is the boat and the shore. I remember in our main monastery in Belur Mutt, which is on the bank of the Ganga, which is called the Hooghly there. So when you cross from the monastery to go to the city of Calcutta, or you come from Calcutta back to the monastery, it is these little boats. You get on those little boats and you cross. And the boats, because there's a current in the river, and the boatmen will use the current. So you want to go from here to there, and the current is flowing like this, then the boatman will aim this way, so that you come around here this way. And when you go like that, suddenly you see, I've seen this, and all of us, we can see that. Suddenly you feel as if you are not moving, but suddenly the monastery on the bank, the monastery begins to move, the temples begin to move, the trees begin to move. It's that it's an illusion. We see it all the time when on a train station, for example, when you sit on a train, you look out of the window, you're waiting for the train to start, and suddenly you feel the platform is moving and other people are moving. No, you are moving. So this is a very classic example of an optical illusion created by motion or relative motion. And I was so happy to see Shankaracharya in his commentary written 1400 years ago. He says, as we sail in a boat, suddenly the bank and the buildings on the bank and the trees on the bank, they seem to start moving. What is happening there? The motion of the boat is superimposed on the motionless bank, building, and temples and trees. It's the motion of the boat which is appearing there. Exactly like that. What happens is, the one absolute reality, without any change whatsoever, the changes of the world, the changes in the body, the changes in the senses, and they are superimposed on you, the awareness. Then what do you feel? I am doing, I am walking, I am talking, I am eating, all of that. And also, I am enjoying, I am suffering. All of that is the activities of the senses. It is the activities of the mind. And yet they are imposed on you, the one unchanging light of consciousness. It creates this illusion, I am doing, I am subject to change. But it's actually the change in the appearance. It's the change in the movie. Things seem to be happening on the screen, a screen where nothing is happening. It's just one steady state. On that, you see a lot of action, car chases and volcanoes erupting and King Kong creating havoc in New York. None of that is happening on the screen, but the illusion is imposed on that. So that's one example Shankaracharya uses, the boat and the shore. The other example that Shankaracharya uses is things at a great distance. Things at a great distance from the eyes, very far away. Even when they're moving, they don't seem to be moving. They seem to be staying at that place. Aeroplanes, when you see very high, they seem to be moving slowly and gently. They're moving very fast, but they're moving slowly. Satellites, which move across the skies ever so slowly, but they're moving at thousands of kilometers per hour. And the stars in the sky. It's interesting that Shankaracharya would give exactly this example, that the stars which are very far away and they are moving very fast, but they seem to be stuck there because of the great distance from our eyes. Similarly, that which is moving tremendously, which is changing, an example of great change appearing to be no change at all. An example of no change at all appearing to be change. No change, the temple, the shore, and the trees, no change. They're there. You are the one who's moving on the boat across the river, and yet they appear to be moving. And that which is moving, the stars, they appear to be fixed, eternally fixed and shining in the sky. And through modern astronomy, we know not only are those stars not there where we are seeing them, they were there thousands of years ago. because of the time taken by light to travel across, light years. So they were there years ago, maybe centuries or maybe thousands of years ago. Maybe those stars are not there anymore. They have traveled across space and time. And now they seem to be fixed for us, shining up there. So this shows how the unchanging can appear as the changing, and the changing can appear as the unchanging. You, the pure consciousness, when action is going on, all activities which are going on, they are all appearances in you, the one consciousness. And actually no change is taking place there. Use the dream example. In a dream, you go to some place and you meet with your friend and talk with your friend and enjoy a cup of coffee together. Suddenly you wake up. What do you feel? I did not go anywhere. I did not meet anybody. I did not speak to my friend. I did not have a cup of coffee. And yet all that seemed to happen. All that it was experienced. So from an absolute standpoint, from the standpoint of the absolute reality, Brahman, which you are right now at this point, what Vedanta is saying is not that this will happen when you become enlightened. This is what's happening right now. We don't see it. And the enlightened one sees it. And the enlightened one says, when I act, you think I'm acting, I do not do anything. There are many such stories in the Hindu scriptures, the Puranas and all, when a sage does a lot of things and says, I have not done anything. And even eats a lot and says, I haven't eaten anything. That would be such a dream for today's intermittent fasters, those who are doing dieting. I've eaten a lot and yet I can honestly claim I haven't eaten anything. But that's from the absolute perspective, to demonstrate that absolute perspective, that from the perspective of my real nature as Brahman, I am not doing anything. Brahman does not, choicelessly. It cannot do anything. It is the one reality which is shining forth as all of this. Yet, it is perfectly compatible with a lot of activity. You see, the saint the enlightened one can be very busy. Like Brother Lawrence was saying, he would run a big monastery kitchen. Like Vivekananda, he would found a great monastery on the bank of the Ganga, start a new movement of reformed Hinduism there, awakening India to a sense of its own glory and so on, open the doors for the transmission of all this spiritual knowledge from India to the West. All of this he did. And if you ask him honestly, from your perspective, what did you do? He would say nothing. He's not being humble there. It's not humility. He's just telling you the truth, that nothing has been done. I mean, from the perspective of the absolute, it's perfectly compatible with tremendous activity. Tremendous activity can go on, and yet the enlightened one can seriously claim, honestly claim, from my perspective, nothing has happened, is happening, or will ever happen. It's one consciousness all the time. Absolute reality. Just as from the perspective of the screen, you can play as many movies as you like. The screen doesn't feel tired, doesn't say, oh, I've done a lot. I have had so many tragedies this morning and so many comedies and so many horrors. Nothing. From my perspective, it's perfectly all right. You may have a movie, I'm the same screen. You may have no movie at all, I'm the same screen. Sabuddhiman manusyeshu. That person is wise among all people, because this person knows the secret of karma. Through karma, the reality behind karma is revealed. Sayukta. This person is centered. This is very important. Centered in Brahman, centered in the realization, I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi. It's not that when you withdraw from all activities, sit in a cave and meditate, and the mind is stilled and you feel that I am the witness consciousness, then I'm centered. And when I come out and get engaged in the world of action, then I have lost it somehow, that spiritual reality, that's gone. Now I'm caught up in samsara. No. From an Advaitic perspective, this person is centered in both cases. It's like if the movie screen said, I am this clean screen. I have nothing to do with any movie at all, no horrors, no tragedies for me. But the moment you start a movie, the screen says that, oh, you're polluting me. I'm getting mixed up with all the terrible things in samsara. Nothing at all is happening. It's the same screen whether a movie is playing or not playing. You can play as many movies as you like. And the enlightened one can be as involved in activities as is necessary, or the one he feels inspired to do that, and yet be completely free and centered in the midst of all of that. In the midst of intense activity, absolute calm. In the midst of absolute calm also, sitting in a cave or in solitude, the mind can be intensely active, for the welfare of others and so on. Sakritsna karmakrit. This person is the doer of all activity. What do you mean, doer of all activity? What is activity for? What is karma for ultimately? From the Advaitic perspective, all that we do leads to experience. In the Gita also, Krishna says to Arjuna, Sarvam karma khilam partha jnane parisamapyate. All the karma that you do, lifetime after lifetime, whatever work you do, and you generate experiences, and those experiences will culminate in knowledge. What knowledge? Ultimately, knowledge of reality. The whole purpose of all activities, whatever we do, not just religious activity, not just Vedanta retreats, but you go out there and earn money, you struggle with the world, you raise a family, you meditate, you do yoga, you study, you chase pleasure in the world. One becomes even the worst of things, becomes addicted or becomes criminal. All of those activities will ultimately culminate finally in enlightenment, in knowledge. And this person has become enlightened. Therefore, this person is the doer of all activity. So Krishna Karmakrit. All of activity has come, all action through many lifetimes has culminated in this realization. There is this verse which comes right after the 18th verse. Two verses. I'll quickly read them out. Yasya sarve samarambha kama sankalpa varjita jnanagni dagdha karmanam tamaho panditam buddha. The wise, the enlightened ones, consider that one to be enlightened. Pandit literally, it's a word in English now. It's like a scholar on something, like an expert, an election pandit, a stock market pandit. But the original meaning of pandit was a person who has expertise in some branch of scriptural knowledge. And the original meaning of that word also was the word panda. Shankaracharya defines it. Atma Vishaya Prajna. The enlightenment, illumination regarding my own real nature. That is called Panda. The one who has that enlightenment is Pandit. The real meaning of Pandit is not a stock market Pandit or an election Pandit. The real meaning of Pandit is the enlightened one. And he says the wise consider that one an enlightened one who all of whose activities, notice, the enlightened one is active. All of whose activities are devoid of selfish motives. They are devoid of any sankalpa, any desire-born action. There is no desire left for this individuality anymore. Small individual, no concern. And why is that so? Jnanagni dagdha karmanam. By the fire of knowledge, the seeds of desire have been fried. They will not germinate anymore. The seed of ignorance, which leads to desire, has been fried, roasted by the fire of knowledge. They will not germinate into desires, and desires leading to karma. Avidya, kama, karma. Ignorance, desire, selfish activity. That chain is broken forever for this person. Then the next verse. Tyaktva karma phala sangam nitya tripto nirashraya karmanya bhipravrittopi naiva kinchit karoti sa. So giving up all the desires for the results of action. Why does this person give up the desire for results? You see, this is where karma yoga and jnana yoga, they become one. Why does this person give up desires? Nitya tripta, completely satisfied, full, forever. Nirashraya, without depending on anything other than the self. The moment you depend on an other, a person, an object, a place, a pet, a possession, even one's own body or health, then your happiness is now tied to something else in the world, and it will be bound to give you suffering at one point, and it's also bound to increase or decrease. It's bound to be limited. But in the self, which is pure awareness consciousness, it's unlimited. That is the very nature of bliss. Karmanya vipravritto api naiva kinchit karoti sa. Even though such a one is constantly engaged in action, doing lots. So why would that person be engaged in action? All the actions are for doing good to the world. It could just be spiritual teaching, but it could also be schools and hospitals and endless service activities for the welfare of being, even the material welfare of all beings. Material welfare, psychological welfare, moral welfare, and ultimately spiritual welfare. Especially spiritual welfare, because such a person alone can help us spiritually, ultimately. So this person, naiva kinchit karoti sa, means actually, in reality, this person is not doing anything. It's not, from a perspective, enlightened perspective, from the ultimate perspective, not doing anything. Now, this is the meaning of this verse. And this gives us the perspective on karma from absolute reality, enlightened person's reality. From the nature of absolute reality, which is Brahman, what is karma from that perspective? It is this. Now, to put it practically, karma for an enlightened person would be an expression of enlightenment. Karma for an enlightened person would be an expression of that enlightenment. He or she wouldn't see it as anything different from the absolute reality. Everything there in karma is pervaded by God. There's a beautiful verse which comes a little bit after this, which we are all familiar with in Vedanta societies and many other Hindu organizations and settings. Brahmarpanam brahmahavi, brahmagno brahmanautam, brahmaivatena gantavyam, brahma karma samadhina. So what does this mean? The context is Vedic ritualism, the fire sacrifices which the ancient Vedic people used to perform. So imagine there's an altar, a fire has been lit, priests are chanting, and offerings are being poured into the fire with wooden ladles. And here comes Krishna and says, and why does he use this? Because Arjuna is familiar. This is the kind of religion he's familiar with. And he says, Arjuna, this kind of ritual you're familiar with? Yes. The ladle with which you are offering into the fire, that ladle, it's not a ladle, it's Brahman. It's not an offering which you pour into the fire. It's Brahman, the absolute reality. It's not a fire, it's Brahman. And the one who is pouring it, giving offerings, that one is also Brahman. The one who sees Brahman in action, in every aspect of action, that one alone attains Brahman. Notice then, Brahman is realized not by withdrawing from action, not by trying to give up action, but in the midst of action, you divinize everything. The one who is doing the action, you are Brahman. For whom you are doing this action, that is Brahman. The instruments which you use to perform that action, your body and actual physical instruments, they are also Brahman. And Shankaracharya is very, very categorical in his commentary. He says, it's not a ladle, it's Brahman. It's not a ladle. Ladle is the appearance. Brahman is the reality. It's not fire. It's not that there is fire and somehow that is Brahman. There's a little bit of Brahman in it. No, it is Brahman. It looks like fire. It is Brahman. It looks like you, a person. It is Brahman. It looks like you, the person, are putting that offering into what looks like fire. The whole thing is one reality. Not so difficult to understand. Use the dream example. You and your friend and the cup of coffee which you enjoyed and the talk that you had, all of that is what? The dreamer's mind. You were the mind, the friend was the dreamer's mind, the cup of coffee was the dreamer's mind, the park you sat in was the dreamer's mind, all of it was the dreamer's mind. It's a common example, it's a common experience we have all the time. One reality itself appearing as so many. So this is from the absolute perspective. I think we have almost run out of time. I'll make one more observation and stop. Now, let's be practical. Let's go back to the beginning. This is what I was talking about, is the peak of the Everest mountain. It's the final perspective, the absolute perspective. Now let's go back to the beginning. And now I'm talking entirely from the perspective of classical Advaita Vedanta. What does classical Advaita Vedanta have to say for people who are on the way, not yet enlightened, not yet liberated while living Jivan Muktas, not yet who still cannot honestly say, I am the absolute reality of the universe. So what is the role of karma there? This is the structure of spiritual practice according to classical Advaita Vedanta. 3 levels. You have to imagine it as a 3x3 matrix. How does it work? Yes, all this what we said is true. But now our objection is, I don't feel it to be true. It all sounds so philosophical, so abstract, so distant from my lived reality. It isn't, but it feels like that for me. In that case, Vedanta will say, you have a problem, and the problem is ignorance. And how do you deal with that ignorance? You need knowledge. What is the practice for that? Jnana Yoga. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. You listen to these truths, come to the retreat as often as possible, read the texts, think about it, meditate upon it. When the ignorance will be removed, you will see it is true, that one consciousness is the reality. And oh, I just got muted. All right. One consciousness alone is the reality. Now, even here, we can object. You can say, Swami, that's all very good, but I have been coming to retreats and reading books. You are quite a young fellow. I've been doing this before you were born. And still, I haven't been able to remove ignorance. Still, it isn't a reality for me that I'm illumined, I'm ever free and all of that. Still sounds great, but I don't feel it. Then the next level of problem says the scatteredness of the mind. In Sanskrit, this is called vikshepa, the scattered mind, unable to absorb this teaching. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, at one point, they are all talking about Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna is listening carefully. Somebody is talking about Vedanta. And then he says, all this talk is good, but it must be assimilated. In Bengali, he says, kothaguli to bhalo, dharana hawa chai. It must be, grasped by the mind, made real by the mind. That capacity is not there in the mind. And so what do we need? If the mind is scattered, we need focus, concentration, one-pointedness. What is the method? Raja Yoga or Upasana, and from the Vedantic perspective, meditation. Meditation helps here. It focuses the mind. You say, wait a minute, Swami, I've been meditating for 30 years. My mind isn't focused. My mind runs all over the place. Well, there is a third and final level of problems. That is called, in Sanskrit, mala, impurity of the mind. Mala. And this impurity of the mind is all the garbage that we have poured into the mind, the wrong ways of thinking and behaving and feeling we have over this lifetime and many lifetimes, actually. This does not allow the mind to settle down, to meditate, to become calm. How do you deal with this problem? Problem, impurity of mind. Solution, purity of mind. Now you realize why in Vedanta keep hearing about the purification, chitta shuddhi, purification of mind. How do you do this? Very powerful method is karma yoga. This is the view of karma in classical Advaita Vedanta. Karma yoga, the selfless performance of our duties and other activities as a worship of God, if you will, is a very powerful purificatory practice. The mind thus purified settles down in meditation easily, becomes one-pointed. The mind thus purified and one-pointed, when you apply it to Vedanta, hearing these truths, reasoning about it, meditating upon it, it leads to that moment of illumination, the so-called Brahmakara Vritti, the moment of the breakthrough, where you realize, I am Brahman, and then your job is done. So this is, again, the view of karma in a classical Advaita format. And I know Swamiji has already discussed this, how classical Advaita Vedanta privileges knowledge above devotion and karma. But you can see it in this structure. Problem is impurity, solution, purity. Method, karma yoga. Problem, distraction, solution, focus. Method, Raja Yoga or Upasana, meditation. Problem, ignorance. Solution, knowledge. Method, Jnana Yoga. Oversimplified, but this is generally the structure that the classical Advaitins hold on to. Good, I'm done. Now let's look at the questions.
Okay. See. Just one sec, Swami. One question. What chapter of the Gita were you quoting from, Swami? That's a basic
Chapter
question.
4, verse 18. Chapter 4, verse 18 is Karmanya Karmaya Pashyat, seeing no action where there's a lot of activity and action where there is no activity. That is 18th verse of chapter 4. And the Brahmarpanam verse, which is very important, which is the view of karma, all of it as Brahman. That is the 24th verse of chapter 4.
Okay. In everyday life, is it better to think of each action as this is an appearance in consciousness to reduce the feeling of doership?
I'll make a subtle point here. Let's see if this makes sense. You know, Advaita Vedanta is not so much about doing things, not even so much about thinking things, as about knowing. What do I mean by that? So I am Swami Sarvapriyananda. Is it so much, this I being Sarvapriyananda, is it so much composed of doing certain things? Are there certain things which I'm doing because of which I'm Swami Sarvapriyananda? If I stop doing them, will I stop being Swami Sarvapriyananda? No. Am I Swami Sarvapriyananda because I'm thinking I'm Swami Sarvapriyananda? The moment I stop thinking I'm Swami Sarvapriyananda, do I cease to be Swami Sarvapriyananda? No. Why am I Swami Sarvapriyananda? In what sense? If you ask me, I'll say, I know I'm Swami Sarvapriyananda. I can tell you that I was named this and I can go back to the history. But right now, if you ask me, I am Swami Sarvapriyananda because I know it, not because I'm thinking it or I believe it or I do something. So Advaita Vedanta is not so much about in the midst of action trying to think it's all pure consciousness and all of this is appearing in pure consciousness. You can do that, but I'm making a deeper point. It's more about knowing what is the reality. Why I'm saying this is, for most of us, it's much better to think that when I'm doing all actions, this is my worship of God. This is how I'm worshiping the Lord. It's much easier to do that. If you are decidedly non-theistic, you have a no God streak in your DNA, in that case, you can think of the entire universe as an ocean, and I am that ocean. But right now, there is this wave in the ocean, which is Sarvapriyananda, and that wave is doing certain things, moving in a certain way, but it's all part of one undivided mass of existence, consciousness, bliss. That's also a good way of thinking about it.
Swami, if our Atman is like watching a screen, isn't this a passive relationship to our experiences? So how do we evolve our spirituality in human form if we are not engaging with our experiences to evolve our awareness?
All right. So this is the danger with examples. So Sri Ramakrishna would say in Bengali, Upama Agdeshi, an example is meant to point out one thing. So what it is not, the movie example is what it is not meant to point out is exactly what is said in this question. The idea is not exactly like a movie, sit back and watch a movie. No, that is not meant. Only one thing was meant there in this example. What is we're trying to convey? The Atman is not like you sitting in a movie hall and watching a screen on which movies are being played. No. The Atman, your real nature, is like the movie screen. Not that you are something else sitting aside from that and watching the Atman, on which is playing a movie about the world. No, that doesn't work. Atman means you. You are the movie screen in which the world is playing as a movie. So that's all that is meant here. Now, about the question about engaging. Yes, you are engaged. As this person in this body and mind, if you're going to engage with something, you're engaged with other people and your activities, all that goes on. Nobody's telling you to switch off the movie. As long as the movie is on, you are engaged. What this example does and tells you is that you are much vaster than this one person who's engaged in activities. You're infinitely vast. And it's not that you are one tiny person engaged in some kind of activity, a little life in a vast, uncaring world. That's what we feel. No, rather, the so-called vast world, your vastness exceeds this vast world by many, many factors, infinitely more vast. Ashtavakra sings, I am the infinite ocean in which the universe is a wave. You are not a tiny wave in a vast ocean. You are the ocean itself, in which the universe arises as a wave. And he says, let it arise, let it play around, let it disappear, let it come, let it stay, let it go. I am neither increased thereby, nor am I decreased one little bit. So as the vast ocean, you let the wave form, which is this individual, be engaged in the activity. Whatever activity has to be done, why not? When the wave is up, active, and one day the wave will disappear. Old age will come, activities will reduce, and death of the body will come. And the individuality also will merge back into the vast ocean. You are not gone because you are not the individual. The individual is nothing but you. Let me repeat this. You are not the individual, but the individual is nothing but you. The individual which you consider yourself to be is entirely dependent on the infinitude that you are. But the infinitude that you are is in no way dependent on the individual. The individual is the one engaged in activity. When the individual is engaged in activity, in awareness, in knowledge of its own actual infinitude, imagine the fearlessness, the courage, the calmness, the kindness and oneness you will feel for everybody. They are all you. They are all expressions of that infinity which you are. And then you can engage in any activity, and you will be engaged in activity. Why not?
Well, you've answered this next question. You might want to answer it in a different way. Is wanting to do good for society also considered a desire or motive? How should one reframe thoughts of doing good?
All right. So is wanting to do good to society a desire or a motive? Maybe or maybe not, doesn't matter. If you feel like it's doing good to others, it's a great, great blessing. It's a great blessing. At our practical level, whatever the religion, whatever philosophy you feel, any altruistic impulse, any selfless impulse is wonderful. It is helpful to our onward spiritual development. So that's one. Feel like doing good to others? Do it. Jump into it. Altruism, unselfishness, selflessness, even modern positive psychology shows the first thing to benefit is our own mind and body. The first person to benefit is we ourselves, the one who does it. It's only afterwards somebody else benefits. Swami Vivekananda stressed this point very powerfully. He said, let the giver kneel down and offer. Let the receiver stand up and receive. We are not doing charity. We are actually doing enormous good to ourselves by doing good to others. And reframing it in the frame of Advaita Vedanta. Once you have the framework of Advaita Vedanta, I am Brahman, the entire universe is one with me, is my manifestation. It can automatically lead you to acts of selflessness, unselfishness. I will not tell the name. Recently, a gentleman, a noted lawyer here in New York, he reached out to me. He's elderly. He said, it all seems to lie in selflessness, Swami. Why should we not feed the hungry? Why should we not clothe those who are cold in the winter? That's all we need to do. Why is the Vedanta Society and other temples and why are they worried about their balance sheets and their raising donations and all? We should give away everything to the poor. So I said, I agree with you in principle, yes. But my answer was in two stages. One is this impulse to sacrifice oneself for the poor, for those who are suffering. This is of enormous good to you spiritually. There's no doubt about it. Self-abnegation, Swami Vivekananda calls it. But one must also be a little wise in this. Why? If you convert the Vedanta Society into a soup kitchen, And I would wish you all the best, but I wouldn't want to have much to do with it. The reason is, you clothe the cold and feed the hungry and give medicines to the sick. Good, you help them for some time, but you know for sure none of their problems will be solved even for any length of time. Never. The problems will still continue. You have helped them at that moment for some time, and that's laudable. If you give them spiritual teachings, or if somebody gives spiritual teachings, that is the ultimate solution to all our problems. You see, you have clothed me and fed me, I'm a monk. Now, if you say that's enough, aren't your problems solved? No. I want that illumination, which the Buddha had, Ramakrishna had, Ramana Maharshi had, Vivekananda had. That's what I want. That's what we all want. That will solve all our problems. So that is the highest selflessness or the greatest service that we can do, if we can give that knowledge or help that knowledge to be transmitted. Yeah.
Swami, how does japam help in purifying the mind?
In many, many ways. Two levels. One, of course, the level of distraction, how it helps us to concentrate. Notice, what is the very nature of distraction? The nature of distraction is the mind jumps from one thought to another. So you think of something and that reminds you of something else, and your mind, like a monkey jumping, climbs a tree, hops from one branch to another, and then from a branch to the interconnected branch of another tree. And that's the way it goes. The mind goes like that. That is the uncontrolled mind wandering. And that's the devilish nature of the internet. The internet is designed exactly like that, to mimic the nature of our mind. So that's why it is so pleasurable to browse meaninglessly. One can go on doing that because you just lead to one thing, leads to another, and the internet keeps on shadowing that and providing that for you moment to moment to moment. And if you have Amazon, it also fulfills your desires. You can keep on buying stuff from moment to moment to moment. You can do window shopping for the whole world and so on. So it is a wonderful way to shadow the workings of the mind. That's why it's so addictive. What japa does is, it forces you to come back to the same thought again and again and again, and once again. The same mantra, repetition. Repetition is of great spiritual use. See, repetition has a tremendous power. So, long before we get that illuminating knowledge, we need to clean up our mind, clean up our act, as the saying goes, not only our behavior, but also the mind. And japa helps there. It trains the mind in focus because it brings the mind back again and again and again to the same mantra. Doesn't matter if you get distracted, come back again to the same mantra. That is the level of focus. The other level is purity of mind, because the mantra is the name of God, who is purity itself. Because the mantra has a certain power, there's a huge science to this. Words have power, and especially special words have special power. There are certain special words called the bijas, the seed words. They are literally, Kashmiri Shaivism, Swamiji mentioned, there's the whole science of mantra there. And they consider these sounds to be the foundation of this universe. See, Vedanta is very cavalier. Brahman is the only reality and the entire world is an appearance. But how? How does absolute existence consciousness appear as existing things? How does the changelessness appear as this changing universe? How does pure consciousness appear as thought and perception? So in between, there is a missing link. And Kashmiri Shaivism says language, these bijas, they call it the matrika. And that the vibrations of those produce this entire universe or project this universe. So japa has a very powerful purificatory impact on the mind. It purifies the mind, concentrates the mind. That's the answer in short.
Swami, how does an enlightened person decide what to do from day to day or in the long term if they do not have desires or motives?
You have to ask an enlightened person. But no, seriously, it's not difficult to see, actually, because we have records of the lives of saints. If you look at those who consider to be enlightened, do they seem bored? I'm enlightened. Now what else is there for me to do? It's so boring. everything has been done. Not at all. It's whenever we have these doubts, just look at the life of an enlightened person, Vivekananda or any of the others. They are so full of joy. They seem to be living life much better than the rest of us. They are happy, they are serene, they are centered, they are kind, they are interested in everyone and everybody, but in the welfare, in a very impersonal way, equally. You always feel that they are on your side. So yes, it is very natural to them. But if you ask exactly how, one answer is the conditioning of the mind which was there before enlightenment. That mind continues. Ramakrishna's mind continues as Ramakrishna's mind, and Vivekananda's mind continues as Vivekananda's mind. The imprint of those particular personalities continue. So they'll probably continue to do whatever they have been doing before enlightenment. That's the Vedantic understanding. Sri Ramakrishna, however, says after enlightenment, whatever is there, it's all they do that by the will of the Lord, by the will of God. They are intensely aware of the reality of God, and that whatever they're doing is actually the wish, the will of God. They're acting on the will of God. So they have no end of things to do.